You're listening to the Ketovangelist Podcast, where we're powered by ketones and carbs are for suckers. My name is Brian Williamson. I'm the owner of Ketovangelist.com, and that is a site dedicated to all things ketogenic. And each week on this podcast, that's exactly what we talk about, all things ketogenic. And today, I have a recurring guest who is a returning guest, but it's only the second time that she's been on the show, but I talk to her all the time. It's a little weird. You'll have to wait and see. If you'd like to learn more about the ketogenic diet and lifestyle, I would encourage you to go to Ketovangelist.com, sign up for the newsletter. In exchange for your email address, you'll receive one shiny brand new ebook full of all the foods that you can eat and still stay ketogenic. Sit tight, kids. We're talking to Carrie Brown. You don't want to miss it. Here we go. And hello again, everybody. My name is Brian Williams. I'm your ruggedly handsome host, and this is, in fact, the Ketovangelist Podcast. And joining me today is a guest that I've had on before, but I also talk to her like every week, and we record it, so it's a little bit strange because I'm actually going to be interviewing her today. So we'll see how it goes. So, hey, Carrie, what's going on?
Hello.
So if for those of you who listen to the Ketovangelist Kitchen podcast, you'll recognize that chipper British voice as Carrie Brown. But today she's on the show not as the food expert, but as someone who has used nutrition to combat bipolar stuffs. So let's get right to it. Now, first things first. You, since we last spoke, you have moved across the country, right?
Yes.
You no longer live in the Pacific Northwest. Now you live in the Atlantic Northeast.
Yes.
Now, this move of yours, did it have anything to do with the price of salmon in Seattle? And this is a silent protest?
You know, it kind of did.
Okay.
It had to do, well, it didn't just have to do with the price of salmon. It had to do with the price of everything.
No, it was going up.
It's way more expensive to live on the West Coast than the East Coast. So I moved to the East Coast.
All right. So now you have taken up residence in the nutmeg state of Connecticut. I
am now officially a nutmegger. I have a driver's license and everything.
Okay. That's good because you do drive. So you want to make sure it's all legal and on the up and up. All right. So now I wanted to talk to you about sort of your story, as it were, and that's kind of a broad thing. So I want to like narrow it down a little bit. You've shared for a couple of years now at KetoCon. You've shared the events that led up to your sort of dramatic and radical change in nutrition and how it has positively impacted you. So I'd like to go through that a little bit, if you don't mind. And I want to
I'd love to do that.
All right, good. Because that's kind of why you agreed to come on the show. So where do you want to start? So you have been, involved with food all your life. Now that sounds weird talking to a human being who's been alive for several years, because every human being who's been alive for several years has been involved with food in some capacity because they got to eat. But you have been more involved than the average bear in food because you were professionally paid to produce it. So you had to kind of pay attention to it. Now, at what point in time in the growings up did you start to realize that maybe there wasn't, that there might be like an abnormality? Because bipolar folk at some point in time realize, okay, not everyone is acting or, responding in this way. So something may be off a little bit here. So how young were you when you realized, hey, there might be a problem here?
I think and I won't share what actually happened, but there was something that happened when I was 4 that made me start to think nothing I do is right. Like I apparently cannot make my parents happy in any way, shape, or form, even though I'm trying my best. Like everything I do is wrong. And I can't make sense of this. And, I'm not trying to be a pain, but apparently I am. And how do I change that? And I couldn't. So I started to feel like I was an oddity at a very, very young age. And as I got older, that just became more and more apparent. When I reached my probably mid-teens. So when I was about 15, 16, I really started to study nutrition and try and figure out what my symptoms were telling me. And as it turns out now, I was actually on the right track. There was a few pieces missing, but I was actually on the right track. And I remember as a mid-teenager, so at 16 years old, I would spend an inordinate amount of time in health food stores reading supplement packages and comparing supplements and vitamins and looking at all the alternative foodstuffs, because something told me that there was a food issue, something. I mean,
How old were you? How old are you saying you're?
Well, 15, 16 was when I really started going, this is something to do with food. But all the things I tried didn't seem to have an effect. I was actually on the right track. There was just one key piece of information that I was missing. Plus, of course, when back in those days, naturopaths were like rare as chook's teeth. And in England, everybody thought that they were quacks. You know, naturopathy was just this really weird woo-woo thing and not available on the National Health. So, you know, and I didn't have the kind of money to do that. You know, technology and what we know about health has come a long, long, long way. So I actually started investigating my symptoms and trying to work out what was wrong with me way back in my mid-teens.
So it wasn't a situation where you thought, okay, your reaction to the world isn't necessarily what's the problem. It was that you didn't feel like you were able to live up to certain expectations, and that sort of set you down a path, is what you're saying, right?
Well, but as well as that, I was permanently depressed. I mean, there was no joy. I couldn't feel joy. I was mostly emotionless.
Okay.
I felt at that age, the only way I could describe it as sad, because I didn't understand what depression was, and I'd always felt that way.
Right.
So to me, it was just normal.
When did you realize that it wasn't normal? How long was it before you thought, I don't see everyone else like this?
Right. So, you know, but from when I was a kind of a thinking age, about 4, right up until the time, so I was late teens. So I think I started thinking about that kind of stuff when I was 18, and I'd looked at nutrition, and I tried a bunch of stuff, and I tried supplements that I figured would help my symptoms, but they didn't. And then I think that the thing that changed was that I went to live in London because I was at the University of the South Bank at the National Bakery School, doing my baking stuffs. And the university had a counseling program. They actually had a psychotherapist there that was available for free. And so because I was away from home, it felt like I was able to do that. There was a massive stigma around psychotherapy and depression and all of those things back then. Well, there still is for a lot of people. But back then it was really, you just didn't do that and you didn't talk about it. So when I was 19, I took advantage of the fact that there was an on-site counselor / therapist there that I could talk to. So that was the first time I kind of went and said to a professional person, look, there's something wrong. I now recognize that I'm depressed. I actually have no visible reason to be depressed, but I am. And I've always been like this, and I don't know how to get out of it. And I don't know, and I've tried various supplements and things, but nothing's changing. So, what is wrong with me? Please help me. So I was 19 when I first went into talk therapy.
So what was their response? Essentially more of the, tell me about your mother kinds of things, or did they actually have any sort of other solution than that?
No, it was pure talk therapy. Mm-hmm. And she was great. I mean, she did let me know that she did at least make me feel like I was not completely broken and that I was actually a worthwhile human being, which is something I'd never felt or accepted up until that point. So, and, it's always good to have that kind of, to feel like someone's in your corner every week for even if it's only an hour, that was cool. Yeah. But talk therapy, as it turns out, talk therapy was never going to fix my problems. But that was when I first really started going, this permanent depression isn't normal. There's something wrong with me.
Okay. So now fast forward a couple of years and you've gone through various manifestations of essentially the same thing, right? Of the talk therapy that you're saying. But you find yourself in a situation where things are coming to a head. Yes. So I don't want to give it away. I don't want to like tell too much of the story at once, but from that point, several years later, you find yourself in a situation where really there's nothing that's been helping and you're kind of at your wit's end, right?
Right. So over the next several years, I tried various different things. I mostly just had to suck it up and live with the depression because I had tried everything I knew to get relief and wasn't. I remember when I was living in Australia, I eventually got just so fed up of feeling the way I did and behaving the way I did, which I couldn't explain either, that I went to a doctor there and said, I'm depressed. What do I do about it? And he put me on antidepressants and I took those for a while, but they didn't really help. So I stopped. And I kind of went through that cycle for quite a few years where I would get so depressed that I would, in desperation, I would go to see a doctor. They'd say, you're depressed, and they'd try me on various antidepressants, none of which worked, most of which had some of them disastrous side effects. I remember one antidepressant they put me on made me violent. I remember throwing a coffee table across a room.
But not in a good way, not violent in a good way. Violent.
Yeah, no, it wasn't violent in a good way. I threw furniture, I assaulted somebody. Luckily for me, the somebody understood that it was the antidepressant that had caused the change in character, because I'm not a violent person. In fact, I'm the opposite of a violent person. I'd never been violent and I've not been since. And luckily, again, for me, that person did not press charges, because had they been, I probably would not be here because I'd have a felony assault charge on my record or there would have been prison time or whatever. So I was very grateful that the person I assaulted understood what was going on. One of the things they put me on made me violent. Another one they put me on made me suicidal. I had one that caused a dramatic weight loss, like really worrying weight loss. I had another one they put me on, gave me 24/7 panic attacks. I didn't sleep for 6 weeks, even on double dose Ambien. I thought I'd lost my mind. So, after several attempts to find an antidepressant that worked, I came to the point where I decided that living with the depression was actually less of a problem than dealing with the side effects that these antidepressants were giving me.
So did you quit? You got off them completely?
So I just, after the last one, which was the one that was giving me 24/7 panic attacks, and I just came off them. I just stopped taking everything because I thought I'd lost my mind. I'd been awake for 6 weeks. I literally thought that I'd gone crazy. And I decided that trying to find a way to live with the depression was better than the side effects that these drugs were giving me. At various times during this whole process, I would get, a psychotherapist, but talk therapy was generally not at all effective.
Okay. Now, it was not at all effective for the sort of the bipolar and the depression, but did it help in any way, or was it just at that point it was what you did, so it was part of the routine and that was that?
No, it did later. So after I moved to Seattle after the last round of antidepressants, I decided to take myself off everything. I moved to Seattle and I found a therapist here who specializes in a protocol called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which in my experience is the absolute by a million miles most effective form of talk therapy that I've ever come across. And it's actually, I say it's talk therapy, but you don't actually have to talk. It's a very interesting protocol. And that did at least help me with some things. Like I had a profound fear of dentists, and my teeth were a mess because I wouldn't go because I had this profound fear of dentists. Profound, like I would see the dentist chair and I'd burst into tears. I mean, I just, it was this kind of visceral reaction to the whole thing. I did a 90-minute EMDR session on my dental phobia, and it completely cured it. So I had this 90-minute session of EMDR, and the next day I spent 3 hours in a dentist chair as happy as a clam. So there were some aspects to my psychotherapy that really, really helped me, but my fear of dentists was not related to my depression. So yes, it was, and related to my depression, it helped in that having 90 minutes once a week where I could just go and offload and get my frustrations out and share stuff in a very, very safe environment where that person wasn't judging me and wasn't telling me I was crazy or stupid, or wasn't telling me to get my act together or to suck it up or to, go help people. It'll make you happy. There was none of that. It was just supportive. That was very helpful. It didn't actually change the way I thought, so it didn't fix anything, but it was incredibly helpful and supportive in that kind of way, as well as the EMDR that I use for fixing targeted issues.
Okay.
If that made sense.
Yeah, no, that does. It does. That makes sense. So now, you continue this, you find there are some things that are being helped, but no real root cause for the major problem. And all of this at this same time, are you still experimenting with supplementation and different kinds of nutrition stuff? Or have you basically,
Yes.
Okay. Now, what led you to this more radical shift away from what would be considered orthodox nutrition into, this low carb, this keto kind of world that we live in now? Like, how'd you get there?
So I had a mental break. I lost my mind one night, and I thankfully told my therapist on the phone that I was done, and I couldn't deal with the struggle of this constant depression and suicidal thoughts, and I'm done. I'm going, this is the last time you're going to speak to me, kind of, end of life talk on the phone. And luckily for me, he did what he's supposed to do, which is called the police. And the police showed up at my house, and that didn't go very well.
Why not?
I remember the day very clearly. I had worked 36 hours out of the previous 48. I hadn't slept for 2 days. I hadn't eaten for 2 days, and my brain had been trying to kill me for a week. So when this all went down, I was in no state to be able to be a rational, calm human being.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the police showed up to scupper my plans to just peacefully end it all, which was what I wanted to do, I was a bit peed off.
Yeah.
And anyway, it ended up that I was in handcuffs, and then 5 other police officers showed up, and paramedics showed up, and an ambulance showed up, and I was handcuffed and carted off to the ER, where I was handcuffed to a gurney, placed under armed guard because I was suicidal. Mm-hmm. And in Washington State, it's illegal to commit suicide. Really? Really.
Now, is it illegal to attempt suicide, or is it only illegal to succeed in suicide?
Yeah, suicide's illegal. So in the same way as if you were intending to shoot someone but didn't actually, that would still be illegal. Okay. Just the very act of intending to kill yourself is illegal. Well, or if you're intending to carry out an illegal act, then they have the power to stop you.
Right. Well, I mean, that's good. At least they can, arrest you. But even if you don't succeed, even if you are successful, you're going to spend some time in jail, apparently. So.
Right. Or somewhere locked up.
Right.
So there ensued the worst 9 hours of my life. And I won't go into details. That people can go up and listen to my KetoCon talk for the details of that.
Well, you weren't happy. Like you were pretty. You were not shy about sharing your displeasure with their decision to interfere.
It was incredibly scary.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm single. Nobody knew I was in the hospital. I hadn't been allowed to bring my phone with me. Was I on medication at the time? I think I was on medication at the time. They wouldn't let me take it. It was not a good place to be. And the scariest part for me was that they actually had the power to commit me. It's kind of weird. If you don't go voluntarily, then you go involuntarily.
Yeah.
So, just like, are you voluntarily going to commit yourself? No. Okay, then we'll involuntarily commit you, but that's actually worse. If you voluntarily commit yourself, I think they can hold you for 72 hours. If you don't do it voluntarily, then they legally can retain you for 14 days.
Right.
And as a single woman, if I'd have been committed for 14 days, that would have been disastrous. I don't know. I mean, I'd have lost my job. Everything would have gone to hell in a handbasket. Plus, nobody knew I was there.
Right.
And I had cats at home that wouldn't have been fed. I mean, it was horrible. It was incredibly scary. And I realized in that moment that I had no power at all. I was completely powerless. They literally had control of my life. And that wasn't a fun time.
Okay. So what happens next? Did you convince them that you were okay? Did you?
I did. I managed to talk my way out of the hospital. Luckily for me, it took, because this happened in the middle of the night, it took 5 hours for the assessor who has to come and sign off on committing someone. It took the assessor 5 hours to get to the hospital. And I think in that 5 hours, the tiny part of my brain that was still capable of logical, rational thought realized the position I was in. And I realized that if nothing else, I had to get myself out of the hospital and not be committed. So I persuaded the assessor that I was not a threat to myself. She did decide to let me go home, but it was on the condition that I would see a psychiatrist and that I would be, tested and diagnosed, or not tested because there's no test for it, but that they would figure out something, and I had to agree to that. I also had to agree somebody had to come and get me. I wasn't allowed to go home on my own, and there was various other things put in place. But I got out of the hospital. But thereafter, there followed this merry-go-round of psychiatrists and medications and whatever, while they tried to figure out what would keep me stable. As a result of that, I was officially diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. Mm-hmm. And that actually explained why all the antidepressants that I'd ever taken prior to that hadn't worked, because people with bipolar disorder cannot take regular antidepressants because it does bad things. Well, I knew that, but I didn't realize that the reason it did bad things was because I was bipolar. When they were treating me with antidepressants, they had wrongly diagnosed me as unipolar depression. And so putting me on antidepressants was actually the absolute worst thing they could have done. So once I was diagnosed with bipolar, then a whole new set of drugs came into play as possibilities for something that would keep me stable.
Okay, so different group of drugs is now on the table, right?
Right, yes.
Now, was your response to that, oh, okay, I'll try it because the other drugs wouldn't work, and at least I know why, or at least I suspect I know why, I'll try the new drugs? Or was it, hey, can we just not try any drugs at all? I mean,
not at that point, okay. Because I was literally terrified that if I didn't do what they told me, they would come back and commit me.
Okay.
So a lot of that was a a fear thing, but there was also part of like, I was so depressed that I think I was at the point where I was willing to try something new. And I guess I hoped that with this new diagnosis of bipolar, that they might have something that would help the depression, as well as the fact that I was terrified that if I didn't do as I was told, I'd end up in the hospital again.
Sure. Okay, so you convinced them that you were not a danger to yourself or anyone else, right? That you were okay. And so what happened next?
So they started me on one drug and I was literally like a zombie, like almost comatose for 2 weeks. And I had to go to work because I had to support myself. So they took me off that. They tried something else. And I think it was like number 4 or 5. We finally got something that made me feel okay enough that I could function and I could go to work. So that was, it was good enough for 9 months. And I also had to see the psychiatrist it started out as every week and then it went to every other week. I would have to go to the psychiatrist, which consisted of.
Was this a situation where the psychiatrist had to sign off and give proof that you showed up and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but really the psychiatrist visit was I would show up, I would do this 4-page, how are you feeling? I mean, the same thing every other week would be just checking off boxes, like a multiple choice thing about how I was feeling and what I'd done. He'd punch that into his data machine and then I'd leave. It was kind of, I just didn't even understand how that was supposed to help. But anyway, that was the protocol. So that's what I did.
Okay.
But then 9 months after the night I was hospitalized, despite the medications, I became suicidal. And that lasted for 8 months straight. And halfway through, 2/3 of the way through that, I changed psychiatrists because I just didn't feel like this person was doing anything, but also there was a distance issue. So I found a new psychiatrist and I started going to see him. And at that point, I was really, really like hell bent on finding out what was going on because I just couldn't live with this voice in my head telling me to die all the time. When you're trying to live and your brain is trying to kill you, it just gets really old really fast.
Sure.
So I was going to see the psychiatrist every week at a cost of about $300 a week. And it got to the point where one day I realized that what was actually happening was I was thinking about things during the week because I'm trying to rack my brains like, why is this happening? When did this start? Why is this? And I would go into see my psychiatrist and I'd say, okay, I've been thinking about this. What do you think about that? And he'd go, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And then the next week I'd go in and say, hey, I've been reading about this or I thought about that. What do you think? And he'd go, that's a great idea. Let's do that.
Uh-huh.
And after a few weeks of that, I was like, okay, this is BS. This is just like, this is crazy. So, and I also realized through this process with this particular psychiatrist that nobody was doing any critical thinking except me.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody. They were just drugging me to a point where I was stable enough to not kill myself.
Now, this may be an unfair question, but I would hope that it's not because of professional incompetence on the therapist's part. Do you think it was just a matter of that was sort of the training that, they figured you were getting medication. So, everything else is sort of gravy, no pun intended, but like, why do you think that was the case?
I think, and I actually called him out on this. So this isn't just what I think. We actually had this conversation where I said, you psychiatrists don't actually know what you're doing, do you? And he said, no, we don't.
Okay.
We, bipolar 2 isn't a thing. We just, people have these mental health issues and these behaviors. And to make it easier for us to we categorize you and then we've labeled all the boxes. For all the people that behave in a similar way, they get put in the same box and we've given you a label because this helps us to keep it straight and it helps us to know where to start in trying to find a drug that will help you.
Right.
But I think their whole training, he wasn't a bad psychiatrist. We got on really well as human beings. That's how they train psychiatrists. It's very much like they're trying to treat a symptom.
Right.
They're just trying to make the symptom go away. They're not trying to figure out what caused the symptom. They're not trying to find out why you have whatever it is you label they've given you. They just want to give you a Band-Aid. But I think that's how psychiatry, and I've spoken to other doctors who have agreed with this. And my then psychiatrist agreed with me that they don't actually know what they're doing. And this is how psychiatry operates.
What I find interesting about that is they're willing to prescribe psychotropic kinds of drugs, neurological kinds of drugs that they know impact the physiological connections inside your brain in order to manifest whatever alternate behavior you're expecting. And yet there's very little emphasis in the story that you're telling. There's very little emphasis on the possibility of a physiological root to this problem.
Absolutely.
So how did you get to the point where you realized that there possibly was a physiological root to this problem?
Well, I just got mad one day when it became blatantly obvious that I was the only one that was doing any critical thinking. And a psychiatrist's job is not, in the world of psychiatry and medicine, the psychiatrist's job is not to figure out why. The psychiatrist's job is to find out what Band-Aid they can give you to keep you alive or out of jail. Mm-hmm. That's their job. He was doing a great job because I was still alive. And so, but I just got fed up with the whole process of I'm going away and thinking a week, coming back and saying, what do you think about this? And he was saying, great, let's do that. So I didn't just fire him, I fired everybody. I fired my entire medical team. And I said, look, nobody's doing any critical thinking. Why do I have bipolar? Something caused it. Like, what is it? Is it genetic? Is it food? Is it some chemical sensitivity? Is it the fact that I grew up in a household with a manic depressive parent? Like, is it environmental? Like something made me bipolar. Why is nobody asking what? And so I decided, and I guess this might sound mad to some people, but I'm like, maybe if I can figure out why I have bipolar, we can actually figure out how to stop the symptoms, not just mask them, but how to make them stop happening in the first place. Maybe we can fix it if we know why. And so, and as you know, Brian, there's all the variables, food and chemicals. There's just like a million different variables there. So I decided to start with genetics because I figured that out of all my options, genetics they're an absolute. I mean, your DNA is what it is. So I figured I would start with DNA and rule out all the absolutes and then go from there. So I fired everybody. Mm-hmm. I got my DNA done, which is a simple process. You just spit in a tube and mail it off, and you get an electronic file of your DNA. And I hit the jackpot first time because I discovered that I have a genetic mutation called MTHFR. And MTHFR is, if you study MTHFR and find out all the things that it is implicated in, it's staggering. The things, the diseases and symptoms that we have that are implicated by this genetic mutation. They estimate that a third of the population actually have the mutation. Of course, 99.5% of people have no idea that they have it. So I found out I have MTHFR, and at the same time, I made friends with a doctor on Twitter, and because I was trying to find someone that could help me unravel the DNA, and he had started following me, so we got into a conversation. At some point, I told him about my bipolar, and he said that he thought he could help me. So, and he happened to be 11 miles away from me in Seattle. Mm-hmm. So I went to see him, and that is the point at where I started learning in depth about the ketogenic diet. I knew about the ketogenic diet before that. I was on low carb before that. I'd heard about the ketogenic diet, but I didn't necessarily understand, really what it was or why it might be good for me. So this doctor's reasoning was the ketogenic diet was originally created. It was something that doctors used to help children with seizures. And It was incredibly successful at helping children with seizures. And so this doctor's thoughts were that because the medication I was on for my bipolar was actually an anti-seizure medication, and that was actually working to some point, he said it made sense to him that if the ketogenic diet worked for helping seizures in children, that it might help me since I was on an anti-seizure medication. So he was the one that put me on the ketogenic diet, and it was a therapeutic ketogenic diet, not just the normal. It was the medical ketogenic diet, where the goal was to have as many ketones floating around in your blood as you could possibly get. So, we measured it, and that was the goal, which is not something you would do for weight loss. But it is something you would do for any kind of brain issue.
Right. It's therapeutic as opposed to nutritional.
Right.
Yeah.
So the goal in life was to just flood my brain and my body with ketones. So I started that in mid-July 2015. I then had, because I was exploring everything at that point, I had my DNA, I knew I had this MTHFR mutation, and then I did some funky food sensitivity tests, chemical tests, environmental tests. I did a massive amount of blood tests measuring everything, what was in my blood, what was in it that shouldn't be, what wasn't in it that should be. And I gathered up all of this data, and I found a naturopath near me. And so 6 weeks after I went on the therapeutic ketogenic diet, I saw this naturopath, and we went through everything, and we discovered that I had a complete lack of B vitamins. I had a severe B vitamin deficiency, but actually that made perfect sense because of my MTHFR status. One of the things that MTHFR means is that you do not have an ability to methylate. Now, B vitamins need methylating before the human can use them. So for you, example, assuming that you do not have the MTHFR mutation, when you eat B vitamins, your body magically methylates them so they can be used. My body doesn't do that. So if I eat regular B vitamins, I do nothing with them. Hence, I'd had a lifelong deficiency in B vitamins that I was unaware of. Why that's important for my bipolar is that the number one role of B vitamins is neurotransmitter health. So my neurotransmitters had never had the nutrition they needed because my body couldn't methylate. We also found that I have a genetic intolerance to gluten. I'm not celiac, but my naturopath tells me that there's 7 different ways gluten can affect the body, and only one of them looks like celiac disease. So the gluten had been attacking me all of those years, and I had no idea. Then we also found that I have a very reduced ability to detoxify. Most people's livers just do that automatically. Mine struggles to do that. So toxins had built up in my body over time. And the other significant thing we learned was that my serotonin and dopamine receptors, which control mood balance, were broken genetically in about 40 different places. So if you add all those things up, it was absolutely no surprise that at some point my brain was going to go sideways. It was going to get some form of there was going to be a mental health issue at some point, just because of all of those factors. So with the supplements and the changes we made, plus the ketogenic diet, that is when it got really real about figuring out why I had bipolar and what to do about it.
So at what point did you actually start to feel different, experiencing, and what I mean is, you may understand what I'm saying when I at what point did the world seem like a different place than what you were used to?
So about 5 days after I saw the naturopath and I was on her protocols, I didn't have a headache for the first time in 9 months. Mm-hmm. So physically, within 5 days, I felt a lot better. Mentally, I'd say about 4 weeks in. So I'd been on the ketogenic diet. So I'd been flooding my brain with ketones for 10 weeks at that point. Mm-hmm. I'd been on the supplements that I needed for about 4 weeks. So, yeah.
So about a month.
About 10 weeks after I started the ketogenic diet, I started the depression I started to feel significantly different. Like my brain was literally thinking differently. Mm-hmm. I wasn't having those like voice in my head telling me all the depressive things. I felt different, very different.
Gotcha. Now, so having gone through a bit of a depression curing, I'll say, with keto as well. The sensation that what I tell people is like, I felt a certain euphoria or I felt a certain positivity and I kept wanting to chase that. Was that a similar situation for you, or were you just happy to be happy?
Yes, it was and it still now weirds me out because my brain literally doesn't work the same way as it used to. And because I'm an awkward cuss, I have tried to make myself depressed and I cannot. I can't. My brain literally works differently. And I'm still like in awe of that. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't euphoric for me. For me, it wasn't the addition of new feelings that was so magical. It was the absence of the old feelings. Okay. It was the absence of wanting to die. It was the absence of this voice telling me the world would be a better place if I wasn't in it. How easy it would be and how the pain would all stop. It was the absence of that which mm-hmm. was like startling to me, not the presence of a euphoria.
Okay. Now, did you at any point in time, like when you started feeling better, was it a situation ever of you like, oh, okay, I'm good now, and you went back to the way things were? Or were you like, there's no way I'm going to risk anything aside from, what got me here? What got me to this place of feeling better?
Yeah, there was there was no way, even though it was weird to me to think differently and it was completely alien to the way I'd thought for my whole life. And so I spent a lot of time waiting for the shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. And I think some days I still do that because it's so remarkable to me. So 6 weeks after, 12 weeks after I started keto, 6 weeks after I started with the naturopath, my keto doctor said, we can take you off your lamotrigine now. And I was terrified of doing that.
Sure.
Because before, when I ran out, that was not good. And I very quickly became suicidal. So I wasn't a fan of that. And he said you could do it cold turkey, but I was like, no, let's cut it down. But over the course of a week or two, we cut the medications down to 0. Now that was, in October, it'll be 3 years. So 2.5 years ago, I have been completely unmedicated for 2.5 years. And I've had no symptoms of bipolar for the last 2.5 years. There are still days where my brain is catching up to the reality that we've solved it. We figured out what the problem was and we've actually resolved it. We're not masking symptoms. We've actually stopped the symptoms from occurring. And that is magical. But as I say, when you've lived with something for so long and it's been so intense, it still some days catches me and I'm like, the other shoe's going to drop and it's all going to cave in. That hasn't happened.
Okay. So, and it's funny that you say that because I would imagine that people experience that in various different ways for various different reasons. There's a pretty wide swath of things that keto seems to help with. And I'm imagining that, people from various backgrounds with various reasons for doing keto experience the same thing. Like, you're afraid you're going to wake up one day and it's all going to be gone. Or it's all going to be back to the way it was. And this was a really bad dream or whatever. So that's got to be kind of tough. But how are you getting along now? And I know that's a weird question coming from me because you and I talk all the time, but the folks who are listening, how has your life adjusted to this sensation of kind of, feeling, and I'm using air quotes, normal now?
It is still weird. I'm getting used to it, but it's taken me longer to get used to it than I imagined it would. I wake up every day and recognize that my brain is no longer trying to kill me. There have been various times, especially since I've moved to Connecticut. There's been various times where I've slid into nothing like bipolar, but there's been some depression, but like 1% of what it ever used to be. And I actually think that it's mostly situational. Because of the move, I got off track with my supplements, so I wasn't taking my B vitamins for a while, and that I learned that was not a good thing. So that backed up that, I need to do that. And I think situational depression, like normal people have, is just part of life.
Mm-hmm.
So, when things happen, but what I grew up with was not like a situational depression. It was a clinical depression. It was my brain just didn't work the same way as everybody else's.
It was chronic. It wasn't acute, right? I guess is the term. Okay.
Right. So I have experienced a couple of little dips into depression, but I think they're situational. One was because I got out of the habit of taking my supplements, and two, just the complete upheaval of everything with moving to Connecticut, and I did it very quickly, and so I think it would be weird if I hadn't responded to that in some way. Although moving to Connecticut was the best thing ever, there was loss involved because, I've left a lot of people that I love back there. And it's just been an upheaval and a lot of change. So I don't think that's connected. But I do think that what has kept me going through those two little dips was the fact that my brain was still being bathed in ketones and fat.
Right. So what's next for you? Aside from the fact that you're spreading the word about how just changing what you eat, getting the right vitamin supplementation can actually have an impact on mental health, what's next for Carrie? What are you up to?
So honestly, apart from if I ever take a day off and go indulge my other passion, which is landscape photography, my plan is to spend my life spreading the message that mental health is not necessarily something that you simply have to live with and or medicate yourself with. I really want people to understand that there's hope, and not everybody's going to have the same fix as me. Not everybody's going to find out that their bipolar is fixed by methylated B vitamins. And so the fix for everybody won't be the same, but I absolutely believe that if people take on the task of being their own detective and getting a team of people around them who are interested in the whys, who are interested in stopping the symptoms rather than masking them, that mental health, we can radically change the mental health landscape in a way that way less people are suffering and way less people are dying. The rates of suicide are astronomical, and I've pretty much plan on spending the rest of my life beating the drum, looking at other ways to heal people with mental health issues and stopping suicides.
Right. So if someone wanted to connect with you to find out more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
There's lots of ways for them to do that. And maybe it would make more sense to people if they know. So part of what I'm doing is talking about mental health a lot, very openly, and sharing my story just to get the word out. But that's not all I do. The other thing I do is create recipes for the ketogenic lifestyle. So in sharing that's a great thing, but I'm also trying to provide things that will help people in a practical way. So developing recipes for the ketogenic lifestyle, which will help people stay on the keto train If food is not delicious, if it's not easy, if it's not something that people can do, it becomes very, very difficult for them to stay on the ketogenic diet. So my other part of or rather than in a practical sense, that's how I'm trying to help people is one, talk about mental health because there's still such a stigma about it, and then provide people with practical tools that they can use to get on the ketogenic lifestyle and stay on it. So I have a YouTube channel, which is The Real Carrie Brown. I also have social media all over the place. The Instagram is The Real Carrie Brown. I'm also on Facebook. We do have a very large Facebook group called the Ketovangelist Kitchen. We also have the Ketovangelist Kitchen podcast, which is available on iTunes.
I've heard of it.
And you have?
Yes.
Do you like it?
I like one of the hosts. I'm not a big fan of the guy. Whatever is it, Byron? I don't remember his name.
Byron. Yeah. You like Connie though?
I do. Connie's good. Yeah, Connie's good.
Okay. So anyway, there's the podcast, there's a Facebook group, and we also have a website, KetovangelistKitchen.com, where I post ketogenic recipes. And I guess the last thing, I have my own website, which is carriebrown.com, and that is where you will find all my ketogenic cookbooks if that's something you need to help you stay the course.
Because they're full of delicious foods. They
are full of delicious foods.
All right. Well, Carrie, thanks so much for sharing your story. It's you've been a very popular speaker at KetoCon 2 years running. And you get mobbed by people who connect with, the stuff that you're sharing. So I appreciate you coming on, taking the time, sharing once again, the story. Of course, I'll talk to you again, probably tomorrow.
I hope so.
Right. So
with a different hat on.
Right. A completely different hat. One made of meat. But you're going around now sharing your story with as many people as you can. So people should get used to hearing you on various podcasts, because I know you've been on numerous ones lately. So do you find it at all, is it cathartic? Is it at all exhausting? Or how do you feel about, basically sharing the same story repeatedly in a short period of time like that? Are you getting kind of burnt out on it? Or are you still like, it's you're just more energized as you go along?
I'm getting more and more energized as I go on, because I'm getting so much feedback. I'm getting so many private messages, emails from people saying, we were at the end of our rope and now we have hope, because if you've done it, maybe I can do it. And you've given me somewhere to start looking, and, and clearly there is a way and I want to find it. So I've had so many of those messages from people that just spurs me on. I think there is still such a stigma about mental health, and so many people are just living in terror and misery of their own brains. And if there's something we can do to at least alleviate it or stop it, then I can't think of, for me, there's nothing more exciting. I don't think I'll ever get bored of sharing my story, simply because I believe it has talking about it makes it more and more. Every time I talk about it, more and more people learn that mental health is not the wicked stepchild. Yeah. It shouldn't be, shut in a closet and told to shut up. We need to talk about it if we're going to save people. So, and I've reached that point in my life now where I simply do not care what people think anymore. So there's probably people out there that are sick of it. I don't care. Because if telling it one more time saves, not that I'm saving them, but if telling it one more time means that one less person takes the step that you take when you just can't fight anymore, then I don't care about people that are fed up with it.
Sure. And I hope you didn't take my question to mean that. I was simply asking, because you can get fatigued, sharing the same story over and over again. And I certainly wouldn't want you to do that. So I'm just hoping that you stay energized is really where I'm getting with that question.
The messages from people saying, oh my goodness, there's a light now, makes me want to just keep sharing it. So
okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your story.
Thank you for giving me the time to share it yet again.
I guess ordinarily I would, say, talk to you later and whatever, but I'm literally going to talk to you probably, both later today and tomorrow. So I'm not really going to say bye or anything. I'm just going to say, I guess we're going to stop the show because that's what we're supposed to do.
It's your show, Brian. Right. You may end it however you wish.
Right. So, well, that's good. But stick around for a minute. I'm going to do the outro and then you and I can chat. All right. Or don't. Totally up to you.
Okay. Let's do that.
Right. All right. Thanks, Carrie. We'll talk to you later.
See ya.
You just listened to the Ketovangelist Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the ketogenic diet and lifestyle and how it can help you with your mental health, I would recommend that you go to ketovangelist.com, sign up for the newsletter. In exchange for your email address, you'll receive one shiny book, brand new ebook rather, full of all the foods that you can eat and still stay ketogenic, and you'll get articles that we send all the time about all kinds of things, including mental health. Powered by ketones.